I have here is a Dell Optiplex 9020. It was a Windows 7 machine, Intel Core 5. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the CPU apart, and I've got some tools here. This is actually a torque driver. It's a small specialized screwdriver for working with electronics. You can buy it at most stores. You don't really need to. Standard screwdriver normally works. And then I've got a bunch of similar tools that have small hex positions and other things of that nature that I've gotten from when I've bought hard drives to upgrade my family computer or RAM or other things, or replacing a screen. Every time you buy something like that, they generally sell you installation tools if you did it yourself, so that you don't have to buy one of these sets for, like, I don't know, it's probably 30 bucks, but back when I bought it. Frequently, you would also wear a wristband that would be for negating any electromagnetic shock, so that you don't shock the components, thereby potentially breaking them. Because this computer's surplus and never going to be used again, you won't see me doing that. So one of the reasons we're doing this particular machine is because it's made for easy upgrade. It's designed this way. It has this handy dandy latch on the back, which we pull it and then we can pull up. Of course, this particular one's been a little ornery. There we go. And the cover of the side of the machine just lifts right off. Some of them have a couple little screws in the back that you screw and it slides and then pulls out. But this is the interior of a computer. Now, one thing I want to point out right here at the very beginning is this little button in the very back. This is a button that Dell always installs on their machines. And basically it's a trip switch. Think of it like a trap. So whenever you open that panel up, this switch, the spring goes up, and it registers a little notch down onto the motherboard, and it tells them if you had something wrong with your machine and you sent it in, that you opened it up. It basically records a little 1 in the boot up instead of a 0, and says, hey, you opened your machine, this is no longer under warranty. There's actually a way you can just interrupt your BIOS boot up. Go in there, that setting is sitting right there, because when obviously they built your machine, they had to reset that to 0 before they sent it to you, and you yourself can also go back in and reset that to 0. It's only for people who don't actually know what they're doing. I guess it catches them, but yeah, that's what that little bad boy is. It can also be, once you've done it once, you can also get in here, and we'll see a little later, we can just unplug it so it never works again. So I want to look at a few of the components here inside. You see the fan here. The fan is almost always somewhere oriented near either a power unit or the CPU, the actual chip that is driving your computer. And so in this particular model, the chip that drives this computer is right under there. We'll look at that in a moment. Before we get into that, I want to kind of clear some of the other hardware out, some of the other peripherals. Running down this left side, this is the power unit. And if you're wondering, how do I know that is a power unit? It's a big metal box that's in there. Power units tend to be big metal boxes installed. The other thing you can do is, if you look on the back of the computer, wherever the plug is, which I can feel the 3-prong plug on the back left side, wherever that plug is, that plug that goes from the wall goes directly into this power unit, which then distributes the power to your computer. So that box is your power unit. It is probably one of the most common components to go bad in your computer. Replacing a power supply is not that big of a deal. People will try and make it to be a big deal. The only hard part about replacing a power supply is this big bundle of wires down here. This big bundle of wires is what takes power to everywhere else. And I'm going to sneak in here and take a photo of it for us for later. And what you have to do is you have to go in and unplug every single one of these, and also remember where they go whenever you put the new one in. I know that probably sounds daunting, but trust me that each of these little plugs has a particular size and shape to it, and so getting them back where they belong isn't nearly as hard as it might seem. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the peripherals off, and this is kind of a, normally there's a drive stack. Your CD drive, your 3.5s, your hard drives, they all tend to be in one area in a form of mount that holds them. And in this particular model, there's a DVD drive right on top. There are little latches that kind of stick off of things all over the place in these models. That's why we're using it. All of them are labeled in this colorful, like cornflower blue. So if you pull up on the flap and pull back, you've got that DVD drive in your hand. And there you are. You could further remove the metal piece from this plastic out exterior that mounts in. It's not necessary. There are two plugs in it. One of those plugs is carrying power, and the other one is carrying data. So you can unplug those two. Just kind of tuck them over here out of the way, and drop your CD, DVD drive aside. Those are real easy to come by if you wanted to add one to your computer and didn't have one. Or you can sometimes buy something similar to, let's see if I've got one here, digging through my private. I have like 4 of these lying around, because I've taken a lot of my old computers apart just in case I wanted spare parts, and I actually took an old drive like that and put it in a portable case, so I didn't have to have, because most computers don't have it anymore. Now, this next bit here is where the hard drives are, and this has enough room, I believe. Well, it's a pretty tight case. There might be enough room in here for 2 of them, but I think this machine only has 1. So there's I'm gonna tilt this up. There's a little thumb switch right here that you slide up, and that unlocks this whole metal bit in the front right hand side of the machine, and that just lifts right out of there. And of course we've got that same problem as we try and lift it out of there. We've got some cables plugged in. Again, a cable that's carrying power and a cable that is carrying data. The data cables tend to be the smaller, thinner. The power plugs tend to be the ones that have more wires and are a little more boxier in nature. And then we can just take this drive mount out. Now, this drive mount I'm holding in my hand right now is a big metal bit with a kind of thumb adjustment up top where it disconnects. But as I said, all the pieces in this are plastic and blue. You can feel the plastic because it's fairly, be careful, don't run your fingers down things too much. This is sharp metal sometimes, and you could, if your skin's dry or something, hurt yourself. But there are 2, if you hold the drive so that you can feel the grill on the back, and you can feel the part protruding on the front, and you hold your hands out to the side, you'll feel 2 little lips. If you bring your fingers forward, you'll feel 2 little plastic lips. And you can pinch those, and you should be able to pinch those and pull. And the metal case that holds the drive, and this is kind of universally sized, you will actually get your drive out of that. And it is also in a small blue holder, and you can just kind of lean on it or kind of pinch it out of there. That holder has 4 small pins on the lower portion of it, and pretty much every drive has a series of 3 to 6 holes going down, 2 to 3 on each side, total of maybe 4 or 6 on each side, so that a mount like this can hold it. That will make it then universally, like you can universally place it in your computer. So this is a hard drive. Generally a hard drive is a chunk of metal with a plastic case. This one has a little circle in it. If it has a little circle in it, Generally that means that it is a physical hard drive, so there's actually a spinning disk in there. And then you'll get there'll be a chip, a small microchip piece of silicon attached to it where the power goes in. And basically all this thing does is translates whatever information's coming off the disk to information that goes down these little pins, so that it goes to the rest of your computer. So that's your hard drive. And this is a fairly common component that you will want to upgrade. If you know how to upgrade your own hard drive and RAM, you can generally get twice as much life out of a desktop CPU like this. The average machine will last 3 to 5 years before it starts showing its age. If you know how to pull one of these out, pop a new one in, you can double your hard drive space for a reasonable, pretty small cost. And that does actually bring us to the RAM. Now, RAM is your random access memory. This is all of the physical information on your drive, your hard data. Your memory is the kind of like it is in a human. It's the amount of processing power and slots that your computer can handle at once. It goes up gradually, generally in increments of 4 or 8. We're generally in the world of working in gigabytes now. And RAM is attached to the motherboard, which is this big green slate here on the bottom. And it is attached to the motherboard in slots. So you'll see a couple horizontal slots here with some clips on the side of it. Everything else on the board feels like little transistors or little pokey square things, but then there'll be these open slots that run it. There's another special kind of card back here. These are basically places you can upgrade your computer. This would be where your video card goes in the back left, parallel to your power supply. And you'll always know that that's where the video card goes, because the video card generally has an out plug where you'd plug your monitor in the back. This machine has its own, every machine generally has its own video card on the board, but we won't be able to see that very clearly right now because this fan cooling for the CPU is in the way. Now RAM, again, is intended to be upgraded. It's intended to be removed. The only time it's not really intended to be removed is on laptops. Generally, laptops are constructed with everything maxed out, and because you have less space inside it to work with. But on a desktop, even on a Mac, or these all-in-ones, generally there's just 2 little clips you punch, and you can take this little rectangular chip out. RAM does have a distinct appearance to it. This is actually a PC3 1 gigabyte chip. It's actually labeled as a 1R by 8, and you might see that there are, or even feel that there are 4 or 8 rectangular kind of black chips on this card, this purple piece or green piece of silicon with a lot of connectors. Each of these are the actual RAM chips, and when you put 4 of them together, you get a gig. And of course, these shiny goldish connectors are what the connectors are. Most RAM chips, you need to know what kind of RAM chip you can have in your computer. When we do this in the lab, I will have a lot of RAM chips out. And one good tell is to match the connectors up and make sure that they actually fit. Because obviously if they don't fit, they're not going to make a connection. One of the machines that I got for this, there wasn't a good connection. It was kind of lazy slotted in there. But just because it fits doesn't mean it's right. So generally you're going to want to check the type and make sure it's compatible with your computer. And you can look that up on almost any computer. Like I use Otherworld Computing for most of my upgrades, and they have a little thing where you just type in what your computer is, and they'll tell you exactly what kind of chip it'll take, and then they'll be more than happy to sell it to you. So now we've stripped off the DVD player and the hard drive. We've pulled the RAM out. And now all we're left with is the motherboard, which is down here on the bottom, the power supply, which is plugged into the motherboard all over the place. But now we can get at all of that, and we can kind of see all of those components in here, which they are many and varied. And then we have the actual central processing unit, or the actual chip. So there are two small little handles on the sides of the fan that you can fit your finger or your thumb in, and I'm going to pull them out sideways and just kind of shimmy this bad boy out. And this is just a big black case that fits around the fan. The reason this exists is it's trying to create a seal around this fan chip and its connection to the back of the computer, where there's an open grate where air can come in. Our modern processors use a lot of power. I mean, just an immense amount of power. And as a result, they get very hot. And if you do not get rid of that heat, things melt. So here's the fan in on top of it. You can see there's kind of a slot down in through here that goes to the screw that's actually attached to this big metal fan thing, which is our heat sink. I'm going to go fishing in my little bag of tools here and see if I've got a screwdriver that will fit down in there, and let me get those off. Yes, I do. Well, that's good, because my torque wrench was going to be way too big. A lot of computer manufacturers like to make components a little awkward like that. So you do need to have a good assortment of different little tools now and then. Now when we do this in class, you are not going to break it down all the way to the chip. But for the sake of this video and being as complete as possible, I'd like to get it all the way down to the chip so that you guys have at least seen it. You know what one looks like. You've got an idea where it is. And you're not going on hearsay that there's actually one in there. So here we go. And I'm trying to be real careful because I don't want to strip out these screws. Stripping the screw is one of your worst nightmares when you're working with stuff. And like everything in this computer, of course, the minute I pull it off, it's being tethered in here by a power cable, right? Just like always. So I'm going to reach down in here, and this power cable has a little, there we are. It has a little locklet on it. So it's the fan. You can get these in different sizes, different powers, in case you guys haven't heard it on the news. Big metal fan thing, which is our heat sink. I'm going to go fishing in my little bag of tools here and see if I've got a screwdriver that will fit down in there, and let me get those off. Yes, I do. Well, that's good, because my torque wrench was going to be way too big. A lot of computer manufacturers like to make components a little awkward like that. So you do need to have a good assortment of different little tools now and then. Now when we do this in class, you are not going to break it down all the way to the chip. But for the sake of this video and being as complete as possible, I'd like to get it all the way down to the chip so that you guys have at least seen it. You know what one looks like. You've got an idea where it is. And you're not going on hearsay that there's actually one in there. So here we go. And I'm trying to be real careful because I don't want to strip out these screws. Stripping the screw is one of your worst nightmares when you're working with stuff. And like everything in this computer, of course, the minute I pull it off, it's being tethered in here by a power cable, right? Just like always. So I'm going to reach down in here, and this power cable has a little, there we are. It has a little locklet on it. So it's the fan. You can get these in different sizes, different powers, in case you guys haven't heard it on the news. You can read this particular one was made in Foxconn, right? That factory we heard about that they were going to build in Wisconsin. I think we heard about it 4 years ago in an election. Yeah, that didn't happen. But anyway, moving right along. So now we can see the heat sink. And the heat sink is a large aluminum component. Aluminum has a very low heat transfer. So it heats up easily, and it also transfers energy to the air easily. So that means it's a really great material for basically bleeding off heat. So whenever the computer's on, this fan would be blowing cool air through here. This would be heating up and then cooling down, transferring it to the air. It looks like it's lodged in here with 4 screws that have springs on them. And it looks like this particular screwdriver does not fit. Well, piffle. Let me see here. Let's swap out to a different screwdriver head on my... I might have to run downstairs. Of course, you won't notice it because I will edit that part of the video out. Let's see. That's a hex. Those 2s are hex. And that's a flathead. And these 2 are completely identical, but I believe they are way too small. Yeah, I'm going to strip that out if I try it. So I will go... And I'll be right back while I find the appropriate screwdriver. I hope one of these 3 screwdrivers will do the job here. I'm going to go with the biggest one first. Yes, it is. Just because the appearance of that hole. And of course, like I said, this is actually spring loaded, which is really interesting. Funny thing about things being spring loaded onto the drive is as we undo them, because there's spring tension on all the legs, you don't want to pull one entirely out like I just did a moment ago. You want to kind of loosen all of them a little bit at a time. And anytime you notice that you're dealing with a spring in anything mechanical or technical, you just want to be careful. Springs have a... If you're not completely sure why a spring is being used or how much load it can carry, you just want to be really careful about it. So you'll see that there's kind of a metal imprint here, and that's where this aluminum piece will touch the chip that's on the board. So we'll put that aside. And now we can see the actual chip that is your computer. The thing that is running your computer, the Intel inside and all that, is actually mounted right here on this metal bracket and is being held on by a really interesting lock mechanism. I have to concede the fact that I have not opened this bad boy up this far yet. It's got a little lever on here, and we can punch that lever and it will release a spring lock, which will then allow me to lift this metal enclosure, and then I should be able to remove the brain of the computer. So this is your chip. You can see all of those little dots in there. You can't really feel them on this side, but you can. We can do it with these computers, but I wouldn't do this with your computer ever. But you can feel the little pins, all the little pins that connect to the places on this microchip, and all the little transistors. So if your motherboard goes, you have to replace this big piece of silicon, this big green piece of silicon that's everything right here. That's your motherboard. If your processor chip goes, that's just this. And these can be bought for about 50 bucks, depending on the quality of them. In fact, my son and I were just looking at building a computer for making a computer like this into a Minecraft server reasonably cheaply. and so that he could play with his friends or have a server up there as a first I'm building my computer experience. And I think he bought the chip. It's heavy. This is a dense piece of metal. If you are doing this with a computer that you intend to use again, which is not the case with the one we are doing right here, you would want to be doing all of this with a static-free environment. You would want to make sure your hands are clean, devoid of oils. You might want to wear gloves as you do it as well, just to make sure, because any little bit of oil intercepting between anything in here can be a huge headache. You may have noticed when I handled the RAM, except whenever I was talking about things, that I will generally always handle RAM holding things on their edges, never touching this edge down here where the connectors are. There are just some practices that right now, as I'm doing this, I'm not paying explicit attention to all of those super hyper care things, because this machine's never going to work again. Well, I guess we could probably try and turn it on, but it's not much of a thing. So I'm just going to get a quick picture of the internal space right here for the sake of us using it. Another place of interest that I want to point out is there's a watch battery right here on this hard drive. And that may seem like a really strange thing to find inside of a computer. Why is there a watch battery in the computer? Because when this is not plugged into a wall, the internal clock and a lot of the internal components and kind of the get up and get going processes, the things the computer even needs to be able to do to know how to properly route the power to all the components and everything, that comes from that little battery. And so you can really mess people up in terms of their troubleshooting on a computer by stealing that battery. No, I would never do that, and I never have. I can say that honestly. Now, now that we've gotten the CPU out and this huge heat sink out of there, we can see the motherboard connectors in the back here. And I'm going to kind of turn this around so that we can see what those are. We can also see the plug from the trip switch is right down here on the drive. I remember when I last owned a Dell, which was probably about 25 years ago, I did some upgrading to it, and then at some point I had to send it in for repairs, and I reset that switch and I had to go back in and plug it back in. But as you can see here in the very back, you can feel in the very back, now that everything's out of the way, these kind of boxy things where the grill and all of a sudden there's a metal plate. And if we turn around the computer to look at it, you'll see that these are the plugs for the old school mouse and keyboard, your VGA plug, all your USB plugs, your Ethernet plug, and your headphone in and out plugs. And then you can see here that there's obviously a slot for a video card and a sound card upgrade, which would fit into these two slots right here. The little one is the sound card. The big one is the video card, because a video card carries a lot of information. And it's kind of impressive that there's actually a video card upgrade slot in these like kind of Optiplex machines, which are meant for business use. They're not really meant for gaming or other things that you might need more video processing. So there's only one component at this point we haven't pulled out, and that is the power supply. Now, like I said, the power supply, you've got a bunch of stuff being plugged into it all over the place. But now that we've gotten all the other components out of here, I can sort of get this mess of wires up. But first I've got two plugs that are coming from the front faceplate that are going, one right here and another one right next to it right there. Now what those two plugs are, if you look on your front faceplate, you have 4 USB slots. Some of those USB slots are carrying power to a device, but they are also, when you plug in your flash drive or your headphones or anything else, information has to go back and forth and be routed to the motherboard. So I'm just going to pull the power supply plug here, and I believe this is probably the data plug because it's got a lot more pins, and unusually that plug is actually a little more heavy duty this time. So now I can kind of get in here and pull all of these cables up. We've got a bunch of them that are going all the way over here to this wall and wrapping all the way around into the board over here. That is probably the power that goes directly to the CPU. It has its own power supply. We've got this little wire that's just kind of in the way here. This is actually the speaker. If you forget to replug it in, you just won't have a speaker on your computer anymore. So get that out of the way. Then we've got, let's see, this mass. We've got a huge chunk of coiled together wires here. And you'll notice the first one I pulled off has 4 plugs to it. The second one I'm pulling off has 8, and it has a little button on it that helps me pull that off. So I'm not gonna screw up knowing which ones this goes to. And then I've got a few other cables kind of snaking around in here, but these are the only 2 that are really going to the power supply here. The one that's taking the power to the motherboard, and this is the 12-volt power converter that goes back here. Not sure why. And then everything else, the hard drives and everything else that gets power, obviously draws it off the motherboard. So now the power supply is free. Now mind you, I've already mentioned, I've never pulled one of these out of this machine before. And I'm looking on the back, and there are 3 screws that are keeping it mounted on back here. So I'm just gonna pop those bad boys off. It's very unusual because there's nothing else on the back of this computer that has a screw. And the purpose of this video is sort of for you to have a preview of whenever we're going to come into our lab day and take things apart and kind of look at it all. But also so that if you want to have it handy, and I'm going to pull it this way a little bit. There was a little blue button down there. Again, everything's labeled in blue. That's why I love these machines for doing this sort of class activity. And there's your power supply. The number one thing to break on a computer is the power supply. I probably didn't have to unplug all the stuff I did to get at the power supply. I could have probably gotten a few less things unplugged. But really, it's unplugging these 2 big cables and just buying a replacement power supply. You can get these for on resale normally. If it's something like a Dell or a common computer, you can normally get these for like $10. If you buy them used, you need to understand it's like buying anything used. It might go earlier. You could probably get them for $5 that way. Most of these components are made by computer wholesalers, so maybe 20 tops for a power supply like this. I bet you could probably get one of these for like $10. And take it apart, slap it back in, plug everything up, $10, as long as you matched it up right. Boom, you just fixed your computer. There's only so many things that can go wrong with a computer. Power supply, that's a big one. That's when your computer doesn't turn on at all. Everything's plugged in, it doesn't turn on at all. Could be your power supply. Your hard drive, right? Because that's where your operating system and everything else is. You're done. Because, right, everything goes into the motherboard, and then you have your CPU chip that can go. Generally, if your CPU chip goes, you ain't going nowhere, because this handles all messaging and processing from your computer. The big 3 are motherboard, hard drive, and power supply in reverse order of how often they go bad. So there you go. We've now pretty much stripped everything out of here. I've got a few connector cables still attached that aren't doing much. But that is a quick breakdown of a computer. Really think of this motherboard as the place all of the important stuff gets connected and where all of the power management and routing of information and everything happens. It's kind of like your switchboard where it connects all the information. And then everything else are just pieces that connect onto it. So there you go. That's your CPU breakdown. And now I'm going to put it back together as quickly as I can, and I'll probably fast forward the video just because you just sat through me taking it apart. So I will be looking for you guys to be able to put it back together. Breaking things and not putting them back together is a no-no in my world. And I think it's going to close, but I'm not sure because of the fan component isn't there as well as I'd like it to be. There we go. Alrighty. Only one or two little missteps.